The Washington Free Beacon has a story. World Wildlife Fund won't let chapters denounce Russia. The World Wildlife Fund, Ukraine, blocked from signing statement against invasion. As an aside, I don't like the World Wildlife Fund because it pressured the WWF to become the WWE, and I still say the WWF, and now people think I'm talking about the World Wildlife Fund when, no, I'm talking about wrestling. Now you're going to say WWE, and just my brain, it doesn't compute. But nonetheless, the actual WWF, the World Wildlife Fund, blocked its Ukraine chapter from signing a public statement last week denouncing the Russian government's invasion, claiming that it could harm the group's long-term ability to do conservation work across the world, according to a Ukrainian environmental activist. The WWF Ukraine chapter has added its name to a joint statement this month organized by the Ukrainian Nature Conservancy Group, which called on democratic governments to ban imports of Russian timber and wood products, a $13 billion industry, and denounced Russia's aggressive war against Ukraine, according to the UNCG. WWF Ukraine was one of the very first organizations to put their names to the statement to ban Russian and Belarusian wood imports, wrote the Ukrainian Nature Conservancy Group's Yehor Rynky. I have no idea. They're literally, well, I guess Y is a vowel there. Hrynyk. In a recent statement on the group's website. But just days later, I received an email from representatives of WWF International's management reportedly asking them to remove the name. Listen, I think that's a little bit crummy there, but I'm kind of sympathetic to this. USA Today has a story out about the remarkable number of hockey players out there who have kept silent. Now, there have been just a couple who actually defended Moscow, but most have been silent altogether. It's difficult for the Russian players in the league, says Brian McClellan, the general manager of the Capitals, who have 3 other Russian players on their star in addition to Alex Ovechkin. I'm sure Philip could pronounce it better. There's a lot of pressure put on them to have a political opinion either way. They're trying to balance out how they live their lives and what their political opinions are and the repercussions that could happen back home. It's a difficult situation for these guys. That, my friends, is the thing that I think is getting lost in this conversation. And it's something that I don't know that a lot of people truly appreciate. And I would at least like for all of my listeners, if we can, to be a little bit sympathetic to the situation that some of these guys. There is, for example, Nikita Kucherov on the Tampa Bay Lightning. And there is Andrei Vasilevsky, who is probably the best goalie in the NHL, and he's Russian. Both of them are on the Tampa Bay Lightning. And they have families in Russia. And you got to keep in mind that this stuff matters. Vladimir Putin is a dictator. What do you think would happen to the families of these people if they spoke out? What do you think would happen? Let's take the World Wildlife Fund. Look, I get the hypocrisy there, I do, and I got no problem with the Washington Free Beacon calling them out, but the World Wildlife Fund's point is they want to save wildlife worldwide. If the Ukrainian branch gets in on the act and denounces the Russian involvement, it could impact the international organization. Now, I find that argument actually to be a little bit garbage because it's the Ukrainian World Wildlife Fund. I mean, the International World Wildlife Fund goes, hey, that was Ukraine. It wasn't us. They got plausible deniability there. But I also get their concern that, gosh, this could make it hard for us in China and Russia and elsewhere to operate, given that this is tied to the WWF. I get that. I do. But there are a lot of people who want, for example, hockey stars from Russia are under an inordinate amount of pressure to come out and condemn Vladimir Putin and the invasion. And in fact, privately, a lot of them apparently want to. There was a news story the other day where one of the agents for a lot of the Russian hockey players was talking about this, that yes, they share the concern, but they have to be careful. And the way it was interpreted by some was that, well, you know, they got fans on both sides. And that's not what the guy is talking about. These people have family in Russia. They've got family in Russia. Andrei Vasilevsky's father is Andrei Vasilevsky. Now, Vasilevsky's the goalie for the Tampa Lightning. My gosh, you guys should see that guy. He's incredible. Vasilevsky's father is a very famous Russian goaltender. He actually played at the highest level of hockey in the Soviet Union and then in Russia after it collapsed. He was in a Russian Super League. 55 years old. He still lives there. What do you think would happen to him if his son came out and announced the Russian invasion of Ukraine? What do you think would happen? What do you think would happen to the parents, the brothers, the sisters? Now, his son, Andrei Vasilevsky, the goalie for the Tampa Lightning, is married to a girlfriend from Russia. What do you think would happen to her family? We, in this country, we tend to be able, by and large, to be able to take political positions that differ from each other. It's harder these days with cancel culture and the like on both sides of the aisle. But we're able, more often than not, to be able to take positions these days, and we don't have to live with a real consequence, except on occasion. To my knowledge, I am the only, well, I shouldn't say the only. Maybe I can at least count on one hand with fingers left over. I am one of the very few, if not the only, conservative radio show host in the United States, local or national, who in 2016 vocally said I would not support Donald Trump for president, who still has a job in radio all these years later. I know multiple people who lost their job because they were very vocally against Trump and they lost their job because of it. I know people to this day who still to this day are trying to sabotage my career because even though I supported him in 2020 and 2016, I didn't, and there will be hell to pay. There's still a level of presumed disloyalty, a presumed level of never Trumpism. You support the guy in 2020 and you're still never Trump. There are a level of people who would like to punish me for the rest of my life. I had people show up on my doorstep, literally had people show up at my house to threaten me and remind me my wife has cancer. I might need my health insurance. Do I really want to take this position? But that's very rare. It's very rare in this country. It's not like I changed my position. I didn't change my position. I was able to keep my job and my ratings went up. It turns out that people like somebody who actually says what they believe and not what people want to hear. But there are a lot of people around the world who aren't in the position that you and I are. If you go to your office tomorrow and you denounce Vladimir Putin, nothing's going to happen to you or your family. But if you've got family members in Russia and you go denounce Vladimir Putin, there'll be hell to pay back home. It's from the New York Times. Eastern Orthodox leaders are outspoken on the Ukraine war, except one. Last week, more than a dozen religious and political leaders sat on the dais of the Ukrainian Orthodox Cathedral of St. Volodymyr on the Upper West Side, listening to solemn prayers and fiery speeches denouncing Russia and extolling Ukrainian resistance to the invasion that began 2 weeks earlier, they gave speeches one by one. The leaders of the Ukrainian, Greek, and American Orthodox churches, a prominent rabbi, the leader of the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of New York, and even the governor of New York, Kathy Hochul. But one group was missing from this interfaith tableau. The Russian Orthodox Church, whose leader, Patriarch Kirill of Moscow and all Russia, is an ally of Vladimir Putin. Organizers said Russian Orthodox leaders in New York had been invited but did not reply. Here in America, they're not taking a position against the Moscow Patriarchate or against the political leadership of the Russian Federation. Archbishop Daniel, a leader of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the USA, said of Russian religious leaders in New York, they're trying to dance a political dance. The world of Eastern Orthodox Christianity is complex, with more than a dozen self-governing branches whose leaders live primarily in cities across Eastern Europe and the Middle East. Because New York is home to hundreds of thousands of Orthodox Christians, many of their churches treat it as an American base of operations. Those include the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, the Russian Orthodox Church, and a subsidiary to it, the Russian Orthodox Church outside Russia. The three have outposts within walking distance of one another. The headquarters of the Russian branches are practically neighbors on Manhattan's Upper East Side, while the ornate Ukrainian cathedral sits across Central Park. Patriarch Kirill is based in Moscow and is the highest authority for both the Russian Church and its New York-based American branch, which merged with the Moscow Patriarchate in 2007. He's also the highest religious authority for most Russian Orthodox parishes in Ukraine. The Russians are all in on Russia, and a lot of the congregants in these churches are not. A lot of the congregants in the Russian Orthodox Church in New York City are actually in favor of Ukraine. But they can't say anything. An atmosphere of fear has descended on the Ukrainian cathedral's Russian counterpart, St. Nicholas Russian Orthodox Cathedral, which is the Moscow Patriarch's administrative and religious headquarters in the United States. The cathedral draws worshipers from across the former Soviet Union, including Ukraine. In recent days, some parishioners and priests seemed hesitant to discuss the war. Some cited the Russian government's repression, saying they feared endangering loved ones in Russia and in Ukraine. One congregant, her face twisted in anguish as she stood on the cathedral's rain-slick steps, apologized for turning down an interview, explaining that her family is in Kharkiv and she worries about them. A priest who spoke on the condition of anonymity out of fear of reprisal said the cathedral has gotten hate mail since the invasion began, and a protester came into the sanctuary and disrupted a religious class. The priest had to call the police. This is a reminder of how awesome we have it in the United States. How awesome we have it. It's a great reminder of freedom of speech and the freedom to assemble and the freedom to protest that we have in this country. They don't have it in Russia. And though you've got athletes in this country who are Russian, they can't speak up, even though we would give them a pass in this country. They can't, because they have family in Moscow. And they very literally may never see their family again if they say something here. We got to show a little grace for the people who can't speak up given the circumstances and be mindful of the reach of the Russians, the propagandists around the world who spread pro-Putin information, the people who live in fear. There's a real issue here that we got to be mindful of in this country. And it's just another remarkable reminder of how great it is to be an American and how free we actually are compared to the rest of the world.